In this video, I will present to you an anti-Slav setup versus the Slav defense as white, of course. And without further ado, let's start that off with knight f3, d5, c4. In the last video, I presented d4 to you when I would recommend e3 followed by a future b4. But in this game, or let's say this position, if you ever come across it, against the common move c6, which fortifies the d5 pawn there. White has many moves, by the way. I should mention b3, c takes d5, e3, g3, d4, of course, being the main line of the Slav defense. Of course, not e4, but I would recommend the move e3 against this setup here. And here, it's quite interesting. It really doesn't make sense why you would play e3, but white's main idea is pretty much not to play d4 so soon. So without the d4 pawn here, not that d4 pawn, forgive me guys. Without the d4 pawn here, notice that the square is really vacant. So one idea of trying to take advantage of this setup is playing possibly b3, or at least pushing the b pawn at some point, followed by the bishop coming to this square and controlling this open diagonal. So the idea is that if the pawn goes to d4, this bishop would be blocked into this structure on the d4 square. So you're leaving your options open, in my opinion, if you play this e3 move. And here there are a lot of moves that black can play, and today I think I'll cover quite a number of them. The first being just, let's start off the bishop moves outside the pawn chain. I think here, probably we can play queen b3. And, b7 is under attack here. This is quite annoying already for black. I mean, moves like b6 are probably not getting the job done, as knight e5 is attacking the bishop here on the g4 square. The bishop probably has to move, and, well, this is just terrible, as d5 is under terrible pressure. White's going to probably have to take their next turn, and, well, it's not looking too great, I think. Notice that if bishop goes to h5, maybe you could even consider g4, but the simple c takes d or even knight c3 is giving white an excellent position due to his lead-in development here. So, I mean, I don't know, the bishop probably has to go back, but knight c3, and, this is just a very nice and pleasant position here. But in any case, this is very weird, I would say. Black doesn't usually place the bishop here. I mean, this kind of setup just seems not harmonious, and you can often just consider a move like d4 here and have good control of the center. White is probably a bit better. I won't go too much in depth into that, but that's just the idea of playing against the bishop there if black plays b6. Another idea is that maybe black will play queen c7, just trying to indirectly protect the pawn, Idea being c takes d, c takes d. We are unable to capture this pawn due to the queen c1 check here, taking our bishop. That's not good for us, of course. But instead of that, against queen c7, we have a strong move in knight e5 anyway, even though this hangs the knight, This attacks the bishop. If black takes the knight, then we are taking the pawn right over here, and this is really just a free rook, I think. We do have to tread cautiously, though. I think that what we should do after knight f6 is probably, we can play h3, forcing this bishop to move first. There's a lot of moves and approaches that I would say that are pretty good. Even d4 possibly is pretty decent. Just give me a second to think about that, actually. Okay, queen b7, knight f6, d4 looks fine to me. I think this is the normal approach anyway. And after this, the queen really has to commit to a square. I think queen d6, maybe c5, queen d8 takes here, bishop a6. That should be good for white in some way, since white's going to play queen b7 at some point, or maybe even bishop e7, followed by bishop c6. Maybe e5 to lash out, and that's not looking very nice for white, but it's a position, and I think that should be an okay position. I don't think this is really that good for white because this bishop's trapped in. I don't think that's really good to allow. Maybe bishop b7 first and attack this pawn here and put some pressure. Very unclear position happens, but white should be able to stay on top there. I wouldn't say unclear. White should probably even win that position because he just has an extra exchange and pawn even in that position. He should be able to, let's say, unwind his position and get his queen out of the corner. So, I mean, that's certainly one idea that we have to work with in there. So, black probably wouldn't take, but he would maybe bring the bishop back. We would push the pawn to d4, and from here, I mean, there's certainly a few moves that black has, but probably he should just continue to develop and try to get this knight out of here. And white can either play f4 or just the simple knight takes d7 is pretty good, as I think, as well. Probably after knight takes, I can take with the bishop or queen. It doesn't really matter. Maybe knight c3. That's very, very comfortable for white. I think just it's very normal. I think f4 is maybe what I would play in a game and maintain this very strong center. I think so. A continuation like that is very much possible. Maybe you consider c5, or at some point you consider c takes d5. It's all up in the air. I think this is just a very comfortable position for white, so I wouldn't really worry about it if I was you for the white side. I mean, I don't really know what else what else black can play against that. I mean, that looks pretty forced to me. And the same thing goes for bishop f5. Maybe here c takes d5 is even possible first, inserting this first with queen b3, attacking both of those, and that's really not ideal for black. I think after queen d7, we would probably play knight c3, and the pawn has to be defended, so it might as well be e6 or knight f6. I don't think it really matters, but gain that tempo, play this, knight b5. This is not possible to take, actually, surprisingly, because of this very nice f4 move, or even d4. It doesn't really matter. The queen has to move, and knight c7 is picking up the rook in the corner, and the king is just trapped in the center. This position is really bad since b7 is dropping here. It's just terrible. Probably bishop d2, rook c1, bishop b5, or bishop a6 if black's pawn moves here at some point. These are all ideas that are going to kill black. So, I mean, after queen b3, it's kind of difficult to even move here for black. I think black's in very serious trouble, actually. Sometimes you can play bishop c8, but it's kind of funny. White can just play d4, and if black just develops normally, maybe knight c3, I don't know. E6, bishop d3, bishop d7, this kind of stuff. This is just an exchange Slav up 2 tempos for white, so I would think that white has at least a small advantage. I'm not really sure how much, but if that's the best that black can do against this, I say that's pretty undesirable. So probably not bishop f5. There's some variations in which white plays e3 and black just plays knight f6. This is the most normal move. I would suggest knight c3 then, and black still might play bishop f5 or bishop g3 or bishop g4, and probably here white should play just queen b3 and attack the b7 pawn again. And I don't know, I mean, what black really should do in these kind of positions, other than, of course, not d takes c4, but then queen b6. It's actually surprising to see that you probably shouldn't take b6 due to the a pawn and the rook getting active. I wouldn't recommend ever really taking there. My experience tells me that that's not a great line for us. I can kind of explain why. You can play knight e5 first. It doesn't really matter. But in any case, takes. These kinds of positions, if you're not really getting anything against the king, I don't know, this one, g4, bishop e5, this is all very normal stuff, I think. Yeah, the idea is that black is going to play e6, maybe he has to play king d8 and king c7 at some point to get out of this pen. But even so, even if everything goes normally, let's say, let's say if I make a few moves to just display what black's idea is, just ignore the concrete evaluations here. Just trying to figure out. Okay, and then black's idea is that he's going to use the open A file and put pressure on here and take advantage of these weak squares at some point, even though it may not be obvious at some point, but at this point. But even so, that's black's point, and he has okay control in my opinion. At least in my experience, I don't think white's getting much in that position, if anything at all. You're just hoping that black is making mistakes, pretty obvious mistakes, if anything in that line. Against bishop g4, I still think queen b3 is a good move, but after queen b6, you do have to play a new kind of just a tempo gaining move in knight e5, gaining a tempo against that bishop, and probably after this bishop e6 would happen, and you can just play d4, and white's probably better. I just don't know how much. Black would probably continue with knight b7, and you can take that and then play knight a4. Pretty good. It's a pretty good position, I think, for white, and you can always play c5 or even knight c5. Probably after queen c7, knight c5, knight b7 is already a threat, and you don't really want to make weaknesses like that are very, very undesirable for us. So I don't think that white's doing that at all. You can consider even c5 or probably even c takes d, trying to make use of the open c file and weak light squares here. So that's pretty good for white if you ask me. I think after bishop f5, what white's playing usually is c takes d5, and probably after this we would just see the pawn captures there and queen b3 attacking this pawn again with queen b7 on the way. I think I've seen some variations with knight c6. Black claims that, okay, sure, I'm getting a lead in development. You can have my pawn, and actually, this is very similar to another Slav line where white has already played d4 but has not played the move knight c3 yet, or knight f3. I can't really recall. I don't play d4 usually, but the idea being is that with the d4 move inserted, white's lost a move, but here white's actually has an extra move compared to that variation, and I think after queen b7, bishop d7, and that other line is the main line with d4 in. I just forget which move is missing. We here, instead of we can make use of this missing move, right? We can play knight b5 and play knight c7, attacking here this king. Rook c8 is forced, and we can probably grab this pawn and eventually consolidate one of the pawns. You have to give back a pawn probably. Black's going to have a very, very dangerous lead in development here, surprisingly, even though all of his pieces are here in the back, but white has no development, so you have to be a little bit careful. Maybe queen a6 and bishop b5 trading off a piece should help alleviate some of the pressure there. I think that's a good way of approaching things. I don't think this line is that great for black. I mean, other than that, I really don't know what to say about this position. Notice that you can't play queen b6 because of maybe knight takes d5 actually, and this is not helping as we have this intermediate move, just winning the pawn and winning the game. I think with an extra center pawn here, so that should be a win for white. Okay, so so those are the general ideas versus the bishop out kind of moves. We're playing queen b3 and attacking the weak light squared pawns here on d5 and b7 and gaining very unusual and very strong pressure, I think. Normally, what black is playing in this position instead of those moves is that he can play a6, he can play g6, he can play e6, and he can play knight bd7 as featured in a very famous game just from last year, I think. Today I cannot talk about g6 and a6. These are very, very long and positional kinds of moves, I think, that will require they're not really consistent with the other couple moves, so I'm just going to present the other two moves with e6 and knight bd7 today. Of course, not bishop f5. Today, I'm just going to show you with knight b7 and e6, of course, and after knight b7, this begins a long substring, let's say subset of variations that are pretty interesting, to be honest. I don't really understand if it's really giving white too much, but it certainly gives an interesting position and taste for the position. This position was played in Topalov Anand from the candidates tournament from last year, and we're going to follow this game for a little bit, but I don't think Topalov is playing the most ideal moves in my opinion. Queen c2 is pretty much designed against moves such as, let's see if I gave, I'm trying to say this. Let's see if I can try to picture this. One idea that white has is maybe he wants to take, and if black takes there, he can play knight b5, and suddenly c7 is a major weakness. So that's one idea that black has to watch out for. But surprisingly, black can just play e5 anyway, and he doesn't really care. Idea being is that c takes d5 happens, and of course black doesn't take back the pawn, but he can take back the knight. Pawn here is defended by the knight here, and black is doing interestingly here. In this game, Topalov did play, I think, a good move in d4. He strikes in the center, and pretty much gains a very decent foothold in the center. I think black is pretty much forced at some point to just develop this bishop. It's hard to find another move other than moving this bishop. Interestingly enough, I don't see a bad problem, like a problem with knight b4, when really white doesn't really have anything better than just move his queen somewhere, right? Queen b1 maybe. And bishop d6 looks okay. Maybe takes first too is not that bad, and this kind of pawn structure isn't so terrible. Maybe a3. This kind of stuff is doing white some good work here. I don't really see this position being so terrible for black, but maybe white's I think white's doing really fine in this kind of position. He shouldn't be worse at all. It's probably a balanced position where there's probably a bit of life in the position as we can see. This queen is preventing this development by the light squared bishop to the f5 square, so that's not bad either. You don't even have to play queen b1, by the way, if you don't like it. You can just play it back to d1 and play a3, bishop e2. Probably black has to take, and you can take with the pawn and play an isolated pawn position. If I recall correctly, these variations can be very complicated with knight f6, a3 here, bishop d3. That looks pretty normal to me. Even though black has already figured out the blockade there, I don't think it's too much of a problem for white to play that kind of position. See if I think knight b6 is possible as well. Instead of bishop d3, sometimes you can even play knight e4, and there's some weird variations here. Black really can't allow bishop d3 here, allowing this formation. I think that's pretty good for white, having already a3, and then you can play a really nice isolated pawn kind of position here. I don't think maybe black should allow that. Maybe you should play queen e7 when queen e2 happens, and there's some very crazy variations here with king d8 here. I think that was recommended by the comp once upon a time. I looked at this very long ago, and I didn't really understand it all too well. I think black's idea is that maybe after king d8 he can play f5, somehow push the knight back and trade queens, and hope to play against the isolated pawn. Very strange kind of positions are present there. But bishop d3 is of course leading to a very solid and comfortable position, I think, for white. But again, I digress there. The main variation that was played in this Topalov Anand game was bishop d6, and to be honest, I don't understand Topalov's decision. Even though, okay, it's easy to say that in retrospect. I take that back. But in the game, he really got nothing after d takes here, queen e4. Very surprising that he didn't really get anything in this game with this kind of position. Excuse that, guys. Let's see, takes. We get the check here, king f8, and surprisingly, white had nothing. But the problem is that he's just lagging behind in development. Even though black's king is stuck in the center, it's not a big deal, so it turns out. So I don't think white should take. Instead, recommended in this book, I think there was a move recommended by Delchev in this Reti book. He recommended bishop d2, and this is surprisingly a poisonous move here. I think after castles, he was, which he gave as the main line, by the way. He just gave, I think, knight e4 attacking this bishop as the best move. Note that you can't play knight b4 because of queen b3, and you're actually dropping a piece there. So, and I think the same thing goes with knight b3, with knight b4, queen b3. White's threatening to take this pawn and threatening to move this knight, attack this bishop, and win a piece again. So that's really not good for black, of course. So I think what was recommended in the book was castles, and after knight e4, this bishop on d6 has to move as it's attacked, right? So of course not knight e4, but we can play bishop c7. And now here in the book, I think there was some interesting line with knight g5, the pawn on h7 is attacked. Of course, you can't play f5 because of knight e6. Note that any knight move to f6 allows a capture on e5 with either the knight or the pawn, probably the pawn, of course. And g6 is forced. And there were some very weird lines with potentially even h4, h5. That's possible. I don't think it's good at all, though. What was recommended in the book, I think, was e4. And I think the knight had to come back, and maybe bishop c4 was the move that he was talking about. Castling long is also very possible here. I don't think it's that great. Your king is a little bit exposed here, and it's a bit risky. Probably good for blitz, but not for over-the-board time controls and studying purposes. Maybe you should just play bishop c4. Very, very natural. White in some lines is really threatening the pawn on f7 and going for this materially imbalance. Some very complicated positions can arise from here. Probably e takes d4 has to be played at some point. Castles, queen e7. Black has to get his pieces out and probably play on the e5 square at some point. Rook e1 is pretty interesting, but I don't think this is the best move. I think maybe white should play h3 surprisingly. And there's a little subtlety behind this move, I think. One idea is that if you... I probably don't have enough time to explain it, but I think probably after knight b6, here I think we should play rook ae1, and surprisingly, this kind of position is very, very nice for us, believe it or not. I think that after h6 we're achieving this e5 move. Knight d5, knight e4, h6 pawn is threatened here, probably g5 has to happen, and queen d4 is looking pretty good for us if you ask me. I don't think that's a bad position at all for white, given black's kingside is just terribly weak and all three pieces are just ready to jump over there. It looks pretty good for us, I think. And I mean, the line given in Delchev's book is a direct rook ae1, but I didn't really understand why this is that great because of knight b6. And the idea being is that your bishop really has to go back. You don't want to give this bishop up. I mean, you can give it up, but and play e5 at some point, but I'm not really convinced about it, to be honest. This kind of structure looks fine for black. Really looks just okay for black, I think. I don't think it's that easy to get the pawn back without allowing black just enough time to recuperate his pieces there. So if I was you, I'd just play just a waiting move with h3. And some ideas that revolve around this position are that maybe black can play c5, right? That makes kind of some sense, but I think white could play rook e1 now. The idea being is that with h3, maybe you're preparing f4 and not committing either of the rooks there. Or maybe it was the other rook. I forget it all, but the ideas are still with f4 and e5 if black somehow wants to gain a tempo here, right? So you still take, of course, and play f4 and play e5. Very, very interesting kind of positions here. That's just the idea that I wanted to show. It's hard to find black a plan here in this kind of position otherwise. Some ideas that also might happen here sorry about that, guys. Let's see if takes there here. Let's see if black plays knight b6. Some ideas that might revolve around this position. Let's see, takes c5 might try to keep the pawn. You can actually try to play a rook c1 maybe back, or still stay consistent with this e5 move, right? Maybe e5 now. And I'm not really sure about the entire position, but you can still try to play b4 and undermine this post here. That's a pretty good position for white, in my opinion. I don't think white's doing badly at all. It's very interesting. I'm not sure if it gives an advantage, but I don't think you really should care about that either. You should just care about playing an interesting position. It's hard to find advantages these days that are so meaningful and so easy to play with. So what matters is the interesting play. So I think that's pretty decent overview if I recalled all the details there of let's see, of this knight bd7 line. The other line that I wanted to show is this Reti anti-Slav setup, and I just want to show you the main ideas versus this setup. The specific theory, and all the moves and the subtleties that are really, if you want to be an expert on this opening, I would really look at the Modern Reti by Alexander Delchev. Um, he really publishes a fine piece of work there in this with these chapters in this book about this setup and what you should do versus it. I'm just going to show you at least the setup that looks pretty dangerous versus this, and it's just b3 if you want to start off, and it's just basically taking advantage of this idea that we have of not pushing the d4 pawn there just yet, and we're going to rely on the open diagonal. Black usually plays knight bd7. Of course, I mean, this is just going to be about one kind of setup, bishop e2, or probably queen c2 first, knowing that e5 runs into c takes d5. This is pretty awkward for black. He can't take with the c pawn, and if knight takes, I'm a little bit skeptical, to be honest. Maybe you can play d4. Yeah, probably d4. Why not? And, that's really okay for us, I think. Probably should be okay. I'm not really worried about this position. If I was white, I think white should be doing quite fine. Or I can't really recall the details. You can also play d4 and go for a French-like structure. That's not that bad either, I think. Really interesting play. You can get pretty weird stuff there. Queen c2. I think the main idea, most players against you will just play bishop d7, bishop d6. And against this, I just want to show you one kind of setup. The idea being is bishop b7, bishop e2, excuse me. And here black has many sub-variations that he can choose from, with queen e7, a6, castles. Castles being the sharpest option is, I think, quite a good move. I think after castles, what white should do is the rook to g1. At first, this looks kind of crazy, right? But knowing that g4 can be even played here is kind of giving some ideas with rook g1. You just don't want to lose the g-pawn if you play rook g1 first. And with this, at least you get to support a kingside attack. That's surprisingly actually dangerous, believe it or not. And after rook g1, black pretty much only has one move, in my opinion. He has to play e5 and strike in the center. The theory here gets very complicated with c takes d5, and I think after knight takes d5, knowing that c takes d5, knight b5 is not possible still. Knight e4, bishop probably has to go back in g4, staying consistent with the king side here. You're not really afraid of knight here, probably because of queen c3, or maybe even queen b1 followed by a3, kicking this knight back. It's not really a big problem. I think white should be doing very dangerously here. Has a very dangerous position, excuse me. Bishop d3, h4, long castles. Even with the a3 move played here, even though it's a little weak, you can really go for a full-fledged attack here. That's really dangerous for black. I think I've played my first blitz game played on the channel has just an idea of those kinds of things in the position. Although that game was really just crazy, I think. But I mean, what would you expect out of this kind of position other than this madness, right? E5 is the idea, and after g4, g5 is pretty good for white. Excuse me. The only problem with e5 is that you can't play g4 like you would want at first. The pretty obvious idea is that if e4, white's doing pretty well, right? With g5, takes here. Notice that black doesn't really want to drop this back because you probably play knight d4, or even play knight h4, maybe a knight f5. That's not that bad, but knight d4 is doing good work with knight f5 coming. I don't know, black really can't afford to just leave the pawn here. I mean, maybe he has to. I don't know. Knight c7 defending the pawn might be the only move, but h4, this pawn shelter over here for black is going to disintegrate. d3 comes, the e4 pawn collapses, and I think this bishop's getting out and helping the attack when white brings the rooks to the h and g files, and it's not looking very fun for black. White's having a lot of the fun, I think. I think probably this exchange should happen. Surprisingly, even though black is up a pawn, knight takes, of course, this position is pretty bad for for black, I think. Probably even this has to be played. And given that g7 is dropping, I don't know. I mean, I think this is looking very uncomfortable for black, I think. Maybe black has to play bishop takes h2 instead of c takes d5, but even still, rook h1 can be played, and this is kind of a crazy position that I would leave the computers to. I mean, unless if you investigated this position very deeply, this position is absolutely insane. So, just one example of insanity, right? So, this is very complicated stuff, as you can see. Generally, you can play this setup against almost any black setup so long as black castles here. The problem is a slight problem, but what happens if black plays b6, you know? Black has not committed to castling yet, and he can still play bishop b7 and kind of delay the setup. And you'd be kind of foolish to play rook g1, because maybe black could consider not castling yet, and this g4 g5 setup doesn't really make much sense in view of black's king not being committed to the g8 square. You're just pushing pawns and hoping for something to happen. That's not really consistent with what we're doing here. So against this b6 kind of setup, you probably don't want to commit to rook g1. Against this setup, I think Delchev, what he recommended way long back in this book, is something along the lines of c takes d, I think after e takes d here, followed by maybe rook c1, g3, bishop g2. If I can ever recall this position, it's been so long, guys. Forgive me if I don't really remember. Bishop d3 or bishop e2. It's been a very long time. Some very common kind of structure with the hanging pawns here is going to arise here, and I don't think this position was bad for white. I think he was giving white a slight advantage. I'm not sure about the merit of that, but it looks pretty nice for white, I think. You can always fianchetto your bishop back here. I think this was one idea in this kind of position. Moving the bishop back here and playing bishop g2, possibly moving the knight here eventually and trying to go for this e4 break in the center when all hell is breaking loose, with the pieces being everywhere, and very sharp position can happen in the center for a few moments before the center liquidates, and it's not really clear to me what happens there. I haven't played and had experience in that position too much. That setup rarely ever happened to me, so I'm not going to lie, guys. I'm not going to lie to you guys. Well, in any case, guys, I hope I didn't rush too much. If I rushed at any point, I apologize for that. But the video had to be condensed, of course, and for next time at least, we'll discuss this g6 idea and a6 ideas. These are two very positional kinds of ways black can approach the position. I don't think black's doing badly at all in either of those, but that's for next time. I hope you enjoyed this video. Today, I just want to recap a little bit. Against this e6 setup, we do definitely want to go for a setup involving this b3 pawn push when we have this nice kingside attack with rook g1, queen c2, g4, castles along, so long as the black king is committed to the g8 square. You probably don't want to ideally go for that. Maybe you can, though. I'm just a bit pessimistic about the entire position if black doesn't castle over there. So you just have to play kind of a waiting game if black doesn't castle over there in this line. Let's say if white goes for a kingside attack, you just have to be cautious about overextending if black does not commit to the kingside. In the other kinds of positions that we talked about, knight bd7 was very strange, right? With this early queen c2. This is very, very unusual, to be honest. This is unique to only the Reti, this kind of position. Very unusual stuff with bishop d2, possibly even long castles, but probably just bishop d2, bishop e2, bishop d2, followed by knight e4, defending the b4 square, by the way. Bishop is very, very nice for that square to be defended. And going for unusual play based around black's kingside being committed over here. That's one other idea. And of course, against most bishop outside the pawn chain moves, we're going to play this queen b3 move. So hope you enjoyed that video, guys. And also just putting some pressure here on the king side. Hope you enjoyed that video, guys. if I lacked precision here in my explanations, please do leave comments about that. I'd like to somehow improve that. I did a well. In any case, if there's anything else that you liked about the video, please just leave that in the comments. Any criticism, of course, would be welcome, and I always appreciate anytime you guys can leave some feedback. That would be very much appreciated. So, all right, see you around, guys. Hope you enjoyed that.